Your brain is running a disaster movie right now, and you bought a front row ticket without realizing it. That tightness in your chest when you send a text and the reply takes too long. The way a single piece of bad feedback at work spirals into a full vision of unemployment, poverty, and ruin before you've even closed the email. By the end of this, you'll understand the exact mechanism behind that spiral and how to interrupt it before it hijacks your afternoon. Catastrophizing is a cognitive distortion, a specific, well-documented pattern where your mind takes a single data point and extrapolates it to the worst possible outcome at maximum speed. A headache becomes a tumor, a missed deadline becomes a firing. A partner's quiet evening becomes the beginning of the end, and the cruel part is that it feels like preparation. Like you're being responsible by thinking ahead. Like you're protecting yourself, you're rehearsing suffering that hasn't arrived. Psychologists have studied this pattern for decades. Aaron Beck, the founder of cognitive behavioral therapy, identified catastrophizing as one of the core thinking errors in the 1960s. He noticed that patients with depression and anxiety shared a specific habit. They consistently jumped to the most extreme negative interpretation of ambiguous events. A neutral facial expression from a coworker became evidence of hatred. A minor physical symptom became a death sentence. The jump happened so fast that patients experienced it as perception, as reality, the way you experience the color of a wall. They genuinely believed they were seeing things clearly. That's what makes this distortion so sticky. It disguises itself as realism. You felt this. Someone tells you to stop worrying and your immediate reaction is defensive. You're being practical. You're thinking ahead. You're considering what could go wrong so you can prepare. Except you never actually prepare, you just marinate in dread. The catastrophic thought arrives. Your body floods with stress hormones, your muscles tighten, your breathing shallows, and then you sit there, frozen. The preparing never starts because the fear already did its damage. So what's actually happening inside your head during one of these spirals? Cognitive scientists describe it as a chain of conditional inferences, each one slightly less probable than the last, but experienced as a single unbroken slide. I made a mistake in the report becomes my boss will notice, becomes she'll lose trust in me, becomes I'll be passed over for promotion, becomes I'll stagnate, becomes I'll never reach my potential. Each link feels logical in isolation. The chain as a whole is absurd. The probability of the final outcome, given the initial event, is vanishingly small. But your brain skips the math. It treats the final scene as if it's already playing. Why does the brain do this? Because from an evolutionary standpoint, false alarms are cheap and missed threats are fatal. Your ancestors who heard rustling in the grass and assumed predator survived more often than those who assumed wind. The ones who catastrophized lived long enough to have children. You inherited their hardware. The problem is that you're running Savannah-era threat detection software in an environment where the rustling is an email notification. The stakes have changed. The wiring hasn't caught up. But knowing the evolutionary explanation changes nothing about the feeling. You can understand perfectly why your brain does this and still find yourself at 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling, convinced that one awkward comment at dinner has permanently damaged a friendship. Understanding alone is a map. You need the territory. The most effective intervention comes from CBT research, and it's deceptively simple. When you catch yourself in a catastrophic spiral, you ask one question: what is the actual probability? You force your brain to do the math it skipped. My boss will fire me because of this typo. Really? Has anyone in the history of your company been fired for a single typo? What happened the last time you made a mistake? Were the consequences even close to what you feared? Almost certainly they weren't. Almost certainly, the thing you dreaded either didn't happen or happened in such a diluted form that you barely remember it now. This is the pattern worth paying attention to. Think about the last 5 things you catastrophized about. How many of them actually came true in their worst-case form? If you're honest, the answer is probably 0. Maybe 1, partially. Your track record of predicting disaster is terrible. And yet each new catastrophic thought arrives wearing the same costume of certainty. Your brain has a 0% accuracy rate on worst-case predictions and a 100% confidence level on each new one. That gap between accuracy and confidence is where all the suffering lives. There's a second technique researchers have found effective, and it works differently. Instead of challenging the probability, you challenge the survivability. Okay, what if it does happen? What if I do get fired? Then what? You'd feel awful. You'd panic. You'd probably eat badly for a week. And then you'd update your resume. You'd call people. You'd start looking. You'd adapt. The way you've adapted to every hard thing that's actually happened to you. The catastrophic vision always ends at the disaster. It never includes the recovery. Your brain edits out the part where you cope, improvise, and rebuild, because showing you that part would undermine the urgency of the alarm. A therapist named Albert Ellis used to ask patients a question that sounds almost rude in its simplicity. And then what? Keep going past the catastrophe. Don't stop at the explosion, follow the timeline forward. What happens a week after the worst case? A month? A year? When you extend the timeline, the catastrophe shrinks. It stops being an ending and starts being an event. One chapter in a longer story where you're still the main character, still making decisions, still moving. There's a subtlety here worth respecting. Some people catastrophize because they've experienced actual catastrophe. Trauma rewires the threat detection system. If you grew up in an environment where bad things happened without warning, your brain learned that the worst case is the likely case, because for a while, it was. Telling someone with that history to just think positive is like telling someone with a broken leg to walk it off. If your catastrophizing is rooted in trauma, the techniques still work, but they work better inside a therapeutic relationship where someone can help you distinguish between old pattern recognition and present moment reality. Willpower alone may genuinely fall short, and acknowledging that is the honest thing to do. For the rest of the population, the everyday catastrophizers, the ones whose brains simply default to worst case as a thinking style, the intervention is practice. Daily boring repetitive practice. Every time you notice the spiral starting, you interrupt it. You ask, what's the actual probability, you ask? And then what? You notice that the feeling of certainty is a feeling, a sensation in your body, a weather pattern. And weather passes. A useful reframe comes from researchers who study worry as a behavior rather than a thought. They found that chronic worriers treat catastrophizing as a form of problem solving. It feels productive. It feels like you're working on the problem. You're doing something about it. Sitting with the discomfort and thinking through scenarios. Except the scenarios you're thinking through are fictional. You're solving problems that don't exist yet and probably never will. Meanwhile, the actual problems, the ones sitting quietly on your desk right now, go unaddressed because all your cognitive bandwidth is allocated to fantasy disasters. The real cost of catastrophizing is the present. Every minute spent in a worst-case future is a minute stolen from the actual moment you're living. Your kid is talking to you, and you're nodding while mentally rehearsing a conversation with your landlord that may never happen. Your friend is telling a story, and you're calculating how a minor health symptom might develop over the next 6 months. You're physically here. Mentally, you're living in a burning building that exists only in your imagination. There's a question that cuts through all of it. Ask yourself, what would I do right now if I trusted myself to handle whatever comes? Because that's the real fear underneath every catastrophic thought. The disaster itself is the surface. Underneath it is a quieter belief, I can't handle it, I won't cope, I'll fall apart and stay apart. Every catastrophic spiral is, at its core, a vote of no confidence in your future self. Your future self has a track record. Look at it. Every crisis you've faced, you survived. Some of them broke you open in ways that took months to heal. You healed anyway. Some of them left scars you still carry. You carry them and you keep moving. The evidence that you can handle hard things is your entire life up to this point. Your brain conveniently ignores this evidence every time it runs the disaster movie. Your job is to remind it, tonight when the spiral starts, and it will, because this is a pattern, and patterns don't break in a day, try something small, catch the first link in the chain. The moment what if appears, pause, ask for the probability, ask and then what, past the worst case. Follow the timeline until you find yourself still standing on the other side, because you will be standing. You always have been. The catastrophe needs you to stop the movie at the explosion. Keep the camera rolling.